The, uh, even in the Vedic literatures, for all sorts of religious performances, an allurement of material gain is offered, and most people are attached by such allurements or blessings of religiosity. Why are such so-called men of religion by material gain? Because material gain can enable one to fulfill desires, which in turn satisfy sense gratification. This cycle of occupational engagements includes the so-called religiosity followed by material gain, and material gain followed by fulfillment of desires. Sense gratification is the general way for all sorts of fully occupied men. But in the statement of Suta Goswami, as per the verdict of Srimad Bhagavatam, this is nullified by the present sloka. One should not engage himself in any sort of occupational service for material gain only, nor should material gain be utilized for sense gratification. How material gain should be utilized is described as follows.
कामस्य नेन्द्रिय प्रतिप्रीतिर लाभो जीवेत यावता जीवस्य तत्व जिज्ञासा नातो यश्चेह कर्मभिः. Hare Krishna. Sagar Prabhuji, translation.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. The translation is, life's desire should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation. Since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth, nothing else should be the goal of one's works. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Manala Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Perfect. The completely bewildered material civilization is wrongly directed towards the fulfillment of desires and sense gratification. In such civilization, in all spheres of life, the ultimate end is sense gratification. In politics, social service, altruism, philanthropy, and ultimately in religion or even in salvation, the very same tint of sense gratification is ever increasingly predominant. In the political field, the leaders of men fight with one another to fulfill their personal sense gratification. The voters adore the so-called leaders only when they promise sense gratification. As soon as the voters are dissatisfied in their own sense gratification, they dethrone the leaders. The leaders must always disappoint the voters by not satisfying their senses. The same is applicable in all other fields. No one is serious about the problems of life. Even those who are on path of salvation desire to become one with the absolute truth and desire to commit spiritual suicide for sense gratification. But the Bhagavatam says that one should not live for sense gratification. One should satisfy the senses only in so much as required for self-preservation and not for sense gratification. Because the body is made of senses which also require a certain amount of satisfaction, there are regulative directions for satisfaction of such senses. But the senses are not meant for unrestricted enjoyment. For example, marriage or the combination of man with an woman is necessary for progeny, but it is not meant for sense enjoyment. In the absence of voluntary restraint, there is a propaganda for family planning, but foolish men do not know that family planning is automatically executed as soon as there is a search after absolute truth. Seekers of absolute truth are never allured by unnecessary engagements in sense gratification, because the serious students seeking the absolute truth are always overwhelmed with the work of researching the truth. In every sphere of life, therefore, the ultimate end must be seeking after the absolute truth. And that sort of engagement will make one happy, because he will be engaged in varieties of sense gratification. And what that absolute truth is explained as follows. Hare Krishna.
Vadanti tattva vidas tattvatam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti savyate. Hare Krishna. Sri Gopal Prabhu. Translation in first paragraph of purport.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagwan. Purport by His Divine Grace, Desi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The absolute truth is both subject and object, and there is no qualitative difference there. Therefore, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan are qualitatively one and the same. The same substance is realized as impersonal Brahman by the students of the Upanishads, as localized Paramatma by the Hiranyagarbhas or the yogis, and as Bhagwan by the devotees. In other words, Bhagwan or the personality of Godhead is the last word of the absolute truth. Paramatma is the partial representation of the personality of Godhead. An impersonal Brahman is the glowing effulgence of the personality of Godhead, as the sun rays are to the sun god. Less intelligent students of either of the above schools sometimes argue in favor of their own respective realization, but those who are perfect seers of the absolute truth know well that the above three features of one absolute truth are different perspective views seen from the different angles of vision. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Satyajit Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. As it is explained in the first sloka of the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, the supreme truth is self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from the illusion of the relativity. In the relative world, the knower is different from the known, but in the absolute truth, both the knower and the known are one and the same thing. In the relative world, the knower is the living spirit or superior energy, whereas the knower is inert matter or inferior energy. Known is inert matter or inferior energy. Therefore, there is a duality of inferior and superior energy, whereas in the absolute realm, both the knower and known are of the same superior energy. There are three kinds of energies of the supreme energetic. There is no difference between the energy and the energetic, but there is a difference of quality of energies. The absolute realm and the living entities are of the same superior energy, but the material world is inferior energy. The living being in contact with the inferior energy is illusioned, thinking he belongs to the inferior energy. Therefore, there is a sense of relativity in the material world. In the absolute, there is no such sense of difference between the knower and the known, and therefore everything there is absolute. Hare Krishna. Very tricky paragraph.
1 to 12. Tadadhana munayo jnana vairagi yuktaya pashyanti atmani chatmanam bhaktya sruta grihitya. Hare Krishna, Lois Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. The seriously inquisitive student or sage, well equipped with knowledge and detachment, realizes that absolute truth by rendering devotion service in terms of what he had heard from the Vedanta Shruti. Purport. The absolute truth is realized in full by the process of devotional service to the Lord, Vasudeva or personality of Godhead, who is the full-fledged absolute truth. Brahman is his transcendental bodily effulgence, and Paramatma is his partial representation. As such, Brahman and Paramatma realization of the absolute truth is but a partial realization. There are four different types of human beings: the karmis, jnanis, yogis, and the devotees. The karmis are materialistic, whereas other three are transcendental. The first class transcendentalists are the devotees who have realized the Supreme Person. The second class transcendentalists are those who have partially realized the plenary portion of the absolute truth, absolute person. And the third class transcendentalists are those who have barely realized the spiritual focus of the absolute person. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures, the Supreme Person is realized by devotional service, which is backed by full knowledge and detachment from the material association. We have already discussed the point that devotional service is followed by knowledge and detachment from material association. As Brahman and Paramatma realization are imperfect realizations of the absolute truth, so the means of realizing Brahman and Paramatma, that is the path of Jnana and Yoga, are also imperfect means of realizing the absolute truth. Devotional service, which is based on the foreground of full knowledge and combined with detachment from material association, and which is fixed by the oral reception of the Vedanta Shruti, is the only perfect method by which the serious inquisitive students can realize the absolute truth. Devotional service is not therefore meant for the less intelligent class of transcendentalists. There are three classes of devotees, namely first, second, and third class. The third class devotees, or the neophytes who have no knowledge and are not detached from material association, but who are simply attracted by the preliminary process of worshipping the deity in the temple, are called material devotees. Material devotees are more attached to material benefit than transcendental profit. Therefore, one has to make definite progress from the position of material devotional service to the second-class devotional position. In the second-class position, the devotee can see four principles in the devotional line, namely the personality of Godhead, his devotees, the ignorant and envious. One has to raise himself at least to the stage of the second-class devotee and thus become enlightened to know the absolute truth. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Sarasija Mataji.
Hare Krishna. A third class devotee therefore has to receive the instructions of devotional service from the authoritative sources of Bhagavata. The number one Bhagavata is the established personality of devotee, and the other Bhagavatam is the message of Godhead. The third class devotee therefore has to go to the personality of devotee in order to learn the instructions of devotional service. Such a personality of devotee is not a professional man who earns his livelihood by the business of Bhagavatam. Such a devotee must be representative of Sukadeva Goswami like Suta Goswami and must preach the cult of devotional service for the all-around benefit of all people. A neophyte devotee has very little taste for hearing from the authorities. Such a neophyte devotee makes a show of hearing from the professional man to satisfy his senses. This sort of hearing and chanting has spoiled the whole thing. So one should be very careful about the faulty process. The holy messages of Godhead, as inculcated in the Bhagavad Gita or in Srimad Bhagavatam, are undoubtedly transcendental subjects. But even though they are so, such transcendental matters are not to be received from the professional man who spoils them as the serpent spoils milk simply by the touch of his tongue. Hare Krishna.
Krishna, Abhishek Prabhu.
Krishna. A sincere devotee must therefore be prepared to hear the Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, Vedanta, and other literatures left by the previous authorities or Goswamis for the benefit of his progress. Without hearing such literatures, one cannot make actual progress. And without hearing and following the instructions, the show of devotional service becomes worthless and therefore a sort of disturbance in the path of devotional service. Unless, therefore, devotional service is established on the principles of Shruti, Smriti, Purana, or Pancharatra authorities, the make show of devotional service should at once be rejected. An unauthorized devotee should never be recognized as a pure devotee. By assimilation of such messages from the Vedic literatures, one can see the all-pervading localized aspect of the personality of Godhead within his own self constantly. This is called Samadhi.
Not the thing. Atah Kumbhir Varnashrama Vibhagasa Swanusistasya Dharmasya Shamsiddhir Haritoshanam. Hare Krishna Pushkar. Translation and purport. Hare Krishna Pushkar. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, O best among the twice born, it is therefore concluded that the highest perfection one can achieve by discharging the duties prescribed for one's own occupation according to caste divisions and orders of life is to please the personality of Godhead. Purport: human society all over the world is divided into four castes and four orders of life. The four castes are the intelligent caste, the material caste, the productive caste, and the laborer caste. These castes are classified in terms of one's work and qualifications and not by birth. Then again, there are four orders of life, namely the student life, the householder's life, the retired, and the devotional life. In the best interest of human society, there must be such divisions of life, otherwise, no social institution can grow in a healthy state. And in each and every one of the above mentioned divisions of life, the aim must be to please the supreme authority of the personality of Godhead. This institutional function of human society is known as the system of Varnashrama Dharma, which is quite natural for the civilized life. The Varnashrama institution is known as the system of Varnashrama Dharma, which is quite. The Varnashrama institution is constructed to enable one to realize the absolute truth. It is not for artificial domination of one division over another. When the aim of life is that realization of absolute truth is missed by too much attachment for indriya priti or sense gratification, as already discussed herein before. The institution of Varnashrama is utilized by selfish men to pose an artificial predominance over the weaker section. In the Kali Yuga or in the age of quarrel, this artificial predominance is already current. But the saner section of the people know it well that the divisions of caste and order of life are meant for smooth social intercourse and thinking self-realization and not for any other purpose. Herein the statement of Bhagavatam is that the highest aim of life or the highest perfection of the institution of the Varnashrama Dharma is to cooperate jointly for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 4.13. Hare Krishna.
1 to 14. तस्माद् एकेन मनसा भगवान् सात्वतं पदी श्रोतव्य कीर्तितव्यश्च ध्येय पूज्यश्च नित्यदा. Hare Krishna, Sri Ganesh Prabhu. Translation and purpose.
Therefore, with one pointed attention, one should constantly hear about, glorify, remember, and worship the personality of Godhead, who is the protector of the devotees. Purpose. If realization of the absolute truth is the ultimate aim of life, it must be carried out by all means. In any one of the above mentioned castes and order of life, the four processes, namely glorifying, hearing, remembering, worshipping, and general occupations. Without this principle of life, no one can exist. According activities of the living beings involve engagements in these four different principles of life. Especially in modern societies, all activities are more or less dependent on hearing and glorifying. Any man from any social status become a well-known man in human society within a very short time if he is simply glorified truly or falsely in the daily newspapers. Sometimes political leaders of a particular party are also advertised by newspaper propaganda. And by such a method of glorification, an insignificant man becomes an important man within no time. But such propaganda by false glorification of an unqualified man cannot bring about any good either for the particular man or for the society. There may be some temporary reaction to such propaganda, but there are no permanent effects. Therefore, such activities are waste of time. The actual object of glorification is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who has created everything manifested before us. We have broadly discussed this fact from the beginning of the Janmadasya sloka of this Bhagavatam. The tendency to glorify others or hear others must be turned to be real object of glorification, the Supreme Being, and that will bring happiness. Hare Krishna.
1 to 15. Yat anudhyasina yukta karma granti nibandaram chindanti kovidastasya kona kuryat kathadatim. Hare Krishna, Teja Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Translation.
Translation by Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Srila Prabhupada. With sword in hand, intelligent men cut through the binding knots of reactionary work, karma, by remembering the personality of Godhead. Therefore, who will not pay attention to his message? Purport. The contact of the spiritual spark with material elements creates a knot which must be cut if one wants to be liberated from the actions and reactions of the fruitive work. Liberation means freedom from the cycle of reactionary work. This liberation automatically follows for one who constantly remembers the transcendental pastimes of the personality of Godhead. This is because all the activities of Supreme Lord, his Leela, are transcendental to the modes of the material energy. There are all attractive spiritual activities, and therefore constant association with the spiritual activities of the Supreme Lord gradually spiritualizes the conditioned soul and ultimately severs the knot of material bondage. Liberation from material bondage is therefore a
Krishna Mataji.
byproduct of
Vanilla Mataji. Hare Krishna, Vanilla Mataji.
Hare Krishna. From liberation. Liberation from material bondage is therefore byproduct of devotional service. Attainment of spiritual knowledge is not sufficient to ensure liberation. Such knowledge must be overcoated with devotional service so that ultimately the devotional service is alone predominant. Then liberation is made possible. Even the reactionary work of the fruitive workers can lead one to liberation when it is overcoated with devotional service. Karma overcoated with devotional service is called karma yoga. Similarly, empirical knowledge overcoated with devotional service is called jnana yoga. But pure bhakti yoga is independent of such karma and jnana because it alone can not only endow one with liberation from conditional life, but also avoid one the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Therefore, any
Hare
sensible
Krishna Mataji. So we'll give chance to everybody. Hare Krishna Sagar Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Therefore, any sensible man who is above the average man with a poor fund of knowledge must constantly remember the personality of Godhead by hearing about him, by glorifying him, by remembering him, and by worship him always without cessation. That is a perfect way of devotional service. The Goswamis of Vrindavan, who are authorized by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to preach the Bhakti cult, rigidly follow this rule and made immense literature of transcendental science for our benefit. They have chalked out ways for all classes of men in terms of the different castes and orders of life in pursuance of teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam and similar other authoritative scriptures. Hare Krishna.
1-16. शुश्रूषो श्रद्धानस्य वासुदेव कथारुचि श्यान्महत्सेवाया विप्रा पुण्यतीर्थनिषेवनात्. Hare Krishna Sri Gopal Prabhu. Translation first paragraph.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. O twice born sages, by serving those devotees who are completely freed from all vices, great service is done. By such service, one gains affinity for hearing the messages of Vasudeva. The conditioned life of a living being is caused by his revolting against the Lord. There are men called Deva or godly living beings, and there are men called Asuras or demons who are against the authority of Supreme Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, 16th chapter, a vivid description of the Asuras is given, in which it is said that the Asuras are put into lower and lower states of ignorance, life after life, and so sink to the lower animal forms and have no information of the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead. These Asuras are gradually rectified to God consciousness by the mercy of the Lord's liberated servitors in different countries according to the supreme will. Such devotees of God are very confidential associates of the Lord, and when they come to save human society from the dangers of God, they are known as the powerful incarnations of the Lord, as sons of the Lord, as servants of the Lord, or as associates of the Lord. But none of them falsely claim to be God themselves. This is a blasphemy declared by the Asuras, and the demonic followers of such Asuras also accept pretenders as God or his incarnation. In the revealed scriptures, there is a definite information of the incarnation of God. No one should be accepted as God or an incarnation of God unless he is confirmed by the revealed scriptures. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Satyadevata Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Sorry. Yeah. The servants of God are to be respected as God by the devotees who actually want to go back to Godhead. Such servants of God are called Mahatmas or Tirthas, and they preach according to particular time and place. The servants of God urge people to become devotees of the Lord. They never tolerate being called God. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was God himself according to the indication of the revealed scriptures, but he played the part of a devotee. People who knew him to be God addressed him as God, but he used to block his ears with his hands and chant the name of the Lord Vishnu. He strongly protested against being called God, although undoubtedly he was God himself. The Lord behaves so to warn us against unscrupulous men who take pleasure in being addressed as God. The servants of God come to propagate God consciousness, and intelligent people should cooperate with them in every respect. By serving the servant of the God, one can please God more than by directly serving the Lord. The Lord is more pleased when he sees that his servants are properly respected, because such servants risk everything for the service of the Lord and so are very dear to the Lord. The Lord declares in the Bhagavad Gita 1869 that no one is dearer to him than one who risks everything to preach his glory. By serving the servants of the Lord, one gradually gets the quality of such servants, and thus one becomes qualified to hear the glories of the God. The eagerness to hear about God is the first qualification of a devotee eligible for entering the kingdom of the God. Hare Krishna.
Already 8 o'clock. So we'll continue our reading next Tuesday.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare
Thank you so much for joining.
Krishna, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hare Krishna.
Shri Prabhupada ki jai.
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 और भक्तवृंद की जय.
Jai.